This is the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. And on today's program, I want to take a look at what's been going on globally and across the United States in the last, let's say, 5 days. And that would encompass Easter also. So, a number of powerful images hit me from the TV screen. I'm sure it hit you from the TV screen if you were looking at television. And the global coverage of the global pandemic was something that many of us have never seen before in our lifetime. So you have the Pope, and he gives his message, but there's nobody in the sanctuary except a handful of selected assistants or whatever to the Pope. And he does his prayer there. And then I believe he normally looked out on the balcony or something. And that square, could be filled with 70,000 people. And it was basically empty. And so you could see the impact of social distancing on the Vatican, the Pope, globally. And then a little bit later in this news show, they showed you footage of Jerusalem, specifically the old city of Jerusalem, where all the Temple Mount, where Jesus preached, in different areas that are of great historic significance to both Jews and Christians. But Israel, and specifically Jerusalem itself, was under a kind of lockdown to halt the spread of the coronavirus, because the coronavirus, of course, has broken out in Jerusalem also. And you could see the guards wearing face masks. They didn't have the plexiglass thing. You could see face masks everywhere. But when it came to the Orthodox Jews, and by Orthodox, I mean the ones that wear those long robes, and they wear the very long beards, and they have, I forgot the particular type of hat that they wear. They wear the hat, they have the long beards, and they have the long sideburn things. Forgive me, because I don't know what they're called, but you know what I'm talking about. And everybody except for the Hasidic or Orthodox Jews who I guess are refusing to. I don't know if they're all refusing to wear these. They're refusing to wear the face masks and the plexiglass thing. So there you are in the land where Jesus was and where the Bible took place, and this coronavirus thing is there. And then they showed you a series of shots of different restaurants, different businesses still open, how they managed to do it. So, for example, Governor Cuomo of New York has ordered all the employers and owners of businesses to pay for and to provide their employees that deal directly, physically with the public on a regular basis. Governor Cuomo has ordered all these businesses and business owners to pay for and provide for protective masks over their eyes, and the face mask thing, if they're in regular physical interaction with the public. So that would include people who work in drive-through windows. Well, it potentially wouldn't have to. I don't want to get on this thing really, because it's not all that. It's kind of a mundane thing, but I'm going to mention it briefly. Okay, so you go up to a drive-through, let's say, hamburger place, right? So normally what happens is you say, I want 2 cheeseburgers, double fries, chocolate shakes, or whatever, okay? But you make your order by speaking into a little electronic box. And you can never hear them speak back, of course, because it's always, burgers? I mean, literally. I mean, come on, you know what I'm talking about. You're in the drive-up window, and that's how it's garbled because it's cheap microphone, cheap speaker. But anyway, you're not talking to somebody physically. It's an electronic. You make an order. Then, depending upon the place, the pickup window may be the payment window. Sometimes there's 3 windows. Okay, so you're really not, if they wanted to, that entire fast food industry could make it, they could do it overnight. They could change their systems so that you only order electronically. Then, if your credit card or whatever is touched, or they take it, they have to have gloves and proof that that they're fresh gloves and whatever. And a video has to be keeping them accountable. And then the person, then when they pick up the bags of fast food, assuming that the workers who did the cooking and assembling of the food are sanitary, the chances of them having a sanitized order are very, very high if you just adhere to and reorganize certain practices of your business. But here's the thing that bothered me about what Governor Cuomo said. The overwhelming thing is, why is it, and there's 2 possible answers, but why is it that he has to give an order to the companies in California to buy face masks and protective stuff and things for their mouth and nose? Why did he have to order them? Why are these employers and businesses not paying and buying that stuff for themselves? Like would they send their own wives and children out to work with people who are potentially carriers of the coronavirus? So I thought it was a strange request, but I'm sure there's a certain percentage of employers and owners that are they're just cheap and rotten people, and they don't care about their employees, and they don't want to spend the bucks. But, as I thought about it a little bit later in the day, I said to myself, is that the real story? Or is the real story that the giant corporations, the big retailers, the big business operations who have the bucks to pay for, because you're not just allowed to use a face mask, you have to have something like an N95 mask and a specialized face plate. And I'm sure there's a code for it, for people's protection. But in order to produce something of that quality to meet the code, I have no idea what the total price would be to an employer. But since most employers are small business owners with very few employees, what may not seem like a big order to people that are disconnected and live in the ivory towers of government, $300, $400, $500, $1,000, $3,000 is nothing to these people. It's pennies. But to many people who are small business owners, having to drop $500, $1,000, $50,000, $100,000, whatever it is, depending upon the size of their business, it's not that they're not playing ball. It's not that they're team players. It's not that they don't care about their people. It's because their business is upside down right now because of the coronavirus. They literally don't know whether they're going to be in business in a month. Everything that should be certain is uncertain. And they're asking themselves the question, well, why should I? They're asking themselves the question privately. If I'm going to be forced to lay off my employees because there's no business anymore, why should I invest in, the biological safety masks and gloves and stuff, and spend $5,000 or $150,000 or whatever amount of money to protect my people if 2 weeks later I'm going to close? And you say, well, why would they think that? Because if they're small business owners And that's most of America, small business owners, and a lot of them are 2 or 3 people, okay, or 4 people or 5. That's that's the way it is. But the point is that, but I forgot the number. It goes into the thousands. A small business owner can still have thousands of employers, but they're still a small business owner. But if you're going to spend all that money as a small business owner, let's say you're a bigger of the small business owners, why would you go out and make this investment when you're sitting around knowing that you can't make payroll for the next 2 weeks unless you start getting some customers, and then the government wants to force you. So the government's telling you, like in New York, you can't operate until you buy these safety things for your employees. See, that sounds very romantic. That looks great for the cameras. But the small business owner is saying, we can't make it because there's no business. Okay. If you force us to shut the doors, we're going to be in the deficit even more. And so those business owners, many of them are saying, it's great that we were ordered to buy this stuff, but if it's going to bankrupt us, let's just go bankrupt now and not get even further bankrupt. Because notice that as monies were allocated from the federal, I think it's from the federal government to the state government, or that's what I've heard. Anyway, ultimately, it's coming from the federal government. So the loans and other things for small business owners, that's the backbone of America, those small business owners may not, many of them have been turned down for their small business loans. I mean, a huge percentage of small business owners are being turned down for their the SBA loans and other things that are supposed to stimulate the economy and go into the hands of the small business owner so he can keep employing people and making payroll, et cetera, or she. Now, why would a small business owner, why would they be turned down at a much, much higher percentage than the massive corporations? Well, many reasons. The big corporations and the big business owners can afford to lobby, to pay off politicians, to get bills passed. They're in a very cozy relationship with the politicians. Small business owners aren't. Nobody's buying anybody off. They're on their own. That's one reason. And then these giant corporations that employ massive numbers of employees also have giant armies of attorneys and lawyers and legal experts to defend them and to show them how to fill out forms just perfectly so it's a guaranteed approval on your loan, because on their payroll are professionals. In fact, I can guarantee you in the major corporations, the people they hire to create their loan applications would be people who have done it before or have worked for the federal government. So they have a big upper hand when they fill out the paperwork. And so what happens is it's not some husband and wife who own a small business. It's this massive corporation with an army of lawyers and accountants who have spent hours or days finding out how to fill out the paperwork for the SBA loans, etc., in such a way that you'll get 100% approval, because they have the millions to spend on getting that information and training their people and setting up a particular code that their employees can use or that the company can use, so when it fills out an SBA loan, well, the larger corporation they can get that money because they have experts doing the guidance and thinking for them. And the small business owner doesn't. So it's a rigged system. Speaking of rigged system, that's a rigged system because your competitor has an unfair advantage over you in that they can basically, with their money, buy the right way to apply and guarantee a loan approval. Now, there are reports from all over the United States of furious and angry small business owners who were turned down from banks, from their local banks where they've been doing business for decades and have run tens of millions of dollars through that bank and put tens and millions of dollars of their money in the bank, the small business owners. And for 10 or 20 years, and the bank has seen millions come through and millions of dollars in payroll that has been paid and bills that have been paid. They know all about this person and the person's creditworthiness, and they're getting turned down. One guy had 50 employees. He had transacted millions and millions of dollars over like 20 years through one of the largest banks in the United States. And they turned him down on a small business loan. And now he doesn't know if he can make his payroll. And he was angry because many other small business owners from across the United States have discovered the same thing, that they were turned down. But all these giant corporations, like in the 2008 bailout, the small business owners, by the way, small business owners, let me translate it for you. Small business owner, here's a definition of the small business owner. Small business owner is more often than not has conservative values, is religious, is family oriented, and they can't afford the enormous amount of money to fight legal wars, etc. And yet, through their hard work and stuff, they can move millions of dollars through a bank. I'm talking about legally, for depositing their profits and paying the salary and wages of their employees. And instead of being rewarded for that, they're the ones that get axed immediately. So in the 2000 bailout, who invested all the money that was lost in irresponsible investments? Well, you all know this. It was the financial institutions and the banking institutions who were totally irresponsible in their investing, okay, which caused the 2007 economic collapse, 2007-2008 economic collapse. So immediately, what did the Fed and the government do to bring America out of the economic collapse of 2008? They bailed out all the giant corporations, including the giant financial institutions and the giant banks, which were the very companies that caused the economic collapse through their lousy investments. So they bailed out the people who were the criminals because they were mighty and powerful. They were the banks of the elite. And who did they leave holding the bag? Middle class, the working class business owner. Because they didn't get any bailout. But not only did they not get any bailout, they had nothing to do with the economic collapse. So the people that were punished were the middle class, working class business owners who were absolutely innocent of any wrongdoing related to the economic collapse. They didn't get bailed out. They got punished. And then the people that got bailed out to the tune of trillions of dollars were the financial institutions and banks that caused the problem. Why? Because they have the power. So here we are with all this rhetoric. Here we are, a coronavirus crisis. And we hear all this rhetoric from the Fed and the rhetoric from the politicians and the government and the rhetoric from the blah, blah experts. And what happens is they keep saying, oh, we need to we can't make the same mistake as we did in the past. We need to focus in on and concentrate on the small business owner and the working class and the middle class. We need to concentrate on them. Sounds great, right? The violin's out. We're hearing the violin being played, and we all got tears in our eyes, right? Well, several weeks go by, and we discover that, whoa, we're seeing 2008 repeat. That now it appears that the only people getting the gigantic bailout, the big billions and the big trillions in bailout money, are those same banking institutions and those same financial institutions that got bailed out in 2008. All the big employers and the giant corporations and the giant banks and the giant financial institutions, they're all getting bailed out. Okay. And what about the middle class and working class, who are the small business owners? And there's no bailout. Oh, yeah, there's going to be some stimulus checks. I don't know what the amount is. How far do you think $1,200 would last somebody? A single person relying on one $1,200 check, how long would that last in America today? You already know the answer. So while those people are getting their $1,200 check, which adds up to like nothing, by the way, while they're getting their $1,200 check, these giant financial institutions, the big corporations, and the international banks, they're getting bailed out by hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions. But once again, the middle class, working class get nothing. But there's a huge problem here. Now, if you listen carefully to the Republicans talking and listen carefully to the Democrats talking, the Democrats and the Republicans seem to have some unity on certain issues. One would be I don't hear that many Republicans with fire in their belly demanding that there be some kind of ethics and honesty and fairness in the bailing out of giant corporations versus the bailing out. I don't even see any offer to bail the small business owners out and the middle class and working class out. In fact, now that I think about it, and you can email me and let me know if I'm incorrect, but I don't know, are there really offers of bailing out small business owners? I don't think there are. I think what these offers are, because I've read the SBA loans, the SBA loans are loans. That's not a bailout. Bailout is they're giving people money. You don't have to really pay it back. Or they give it to you on such favorable terms. It's the same thing as a gift. But to the small business owner, they have to pay it back, at least now, the way the language, they have to pay it back. They have to pay it back with interest. And they have to meet an unusually high standard of qualifications. So bottom line is, the small business owner, even if they did everything right, isn't getting bailed out. They're just getting more in debt. So why did I talk about this? I talked about this because this exposes a very powerful, deep reality that we have to confront if we want to connect the dots regarding the coronavirus. You're listening to the Paul McGuire Report. I'm Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us. Sign up for all our social media, free videos, free teaching, free articles. all kinds of stuff free. And yes, we have our books available for you. Books are not free because books cost a fair amount of money to print, publish, and mail. But as somebody who believes that books are of paramount importance in terms of the development of intelligence and equipping people for life, a book is an investment. So visit paulmcguire.us, spread the word about our ministry, spread the word about the message we're trying to get out. And that's all at paulmcguire.us. We'll be back in just a second. What I'm about to talk to you about right now should impact you so powerfully that it should change the way that you look at life forever, because it's a revealing of a truth that is so powerful, but it also has the power to transform your life. It has the power to set you free, and it has the power to give you vision when everybody else is walking around blind. The first thing I want to point out is that the average person that you know and interact with, wherever you're listening to me, for whatever nation you're in. By the way, we're getting a huge amount of listeners, people who have contacted me and through other social media in response. We're getting a huge amount of new listeners in like Norway, Scandinavia, Sweden, those nations. Oh, we're getting a huge amount of people watching and listening in Scotland and Ireland. We're seeing continued long-term growth in watchers and listeners in Great Britain, and a smaller but steadily growing number in France. And this is the interesting thing. We have a lot of people in the EU listening, but those are the nations that we get the most response from. And then it's like in Germany, it's like it blanks out. And in Italy, it blanks out. And there's a lot of other nations in the European Union. It's like they're dead zones. I mean, really, they're dead zones. It's like, what is with those nations? Because in terms of the technology, we're in all those nations in an equally heavy, intense manner. But some of those nations are, I think it's reflective of the spiritual climate of those nations. So, and then we could go around the world. But the point here is, what I'm about to tell you, this truth will change your viewpoint on life. It'll change your consciousness forever, and not just in a lip service way. You will experience a very radical, positive, fundamental transformation in your life, which will ultimately release you to be everything you were created to be, and release you to understand things through the eyes of truth versus the eyes of delusion. So here it is. Notice who are the people that continually benefit. Who are the people that our government gives trillions and billions of dollars to when they mess up, like in the 2008 economic collapse? It's the banks, it's the financial institutions, the multinational corporations. They all got bailed out. Middle class, working class, small business owner, they got nothing. They were allowed to all go bankrupt and lose their houses and do foreclosures. And then we have, the coronavirus, and we hear all the lip service about we're not going to make that mistake again, but when push comes to shove, we're a couple of weeks into the game, and all of a sudden, what do we hear? Is that the small business owner is not getting the loans at his or her local bank, despite the fact that they're good customers and have the credit qualifications. For some mysterious reason, because they're small business owners, they get rejected. And so what you have all across America is, despite all the blah blah, the small business owner is not they're not getting the money that's supposed to be helping them through the coronavirus. And soon they're not going to make payroll, and soon they're going to go bankrupt. Whereas these big, gigantic corporations, once again, are being bailed out. Because after all, they're too big to fail. Okay, so what does this mean? I'll tell you what it means. And see, this is right here, we're at the core of the mystery. Okay? The mystery to understanding life in America and around the world. Did you ever notice that in just about every case, or the overwhelming majority of cases, that I want you to think of the names of, I'm not going to name the names for various reasons, but I want you to think of the names for the moment of all the giant corporations that come into your mind. They could be gas station companies, gasoline companies where you get gas for your car. They could be the names of giant retailers, the names of giant insurance companies, the names of giant banks, and the logos. The names along with the logos. Because the logo has the name built in it. So you have the artwork and the symbols and then the name of the company. It's all one and the same. So what I should have said is the logos, the names and logos of all these giant companies. Automobile companies, medical companies, on and on. And if you know what to look for, and you should, you would recognize instantly that the overwhelming percentage of the logos and names of all these giant corporations, banks, and companies of every kind, the ones that always get bailed out. But if you look at their corporate logos, the name of the company and the artwork and the symbols and stuff, almost in every case with these giant companies, there are always the occultic symbols, occultic numbers, occultic designs, occultic shapes embedded in almost all of the logos of these giant corporations, banks, institutions, etc., etc. So the first question you should ask yourself is, why didn't I know the answer to that until relatively recently? And then you should ask you the question is, why is that so? Why do the vast majority of these corporations and institutions and et cetera, have obvious occult symbols, language, numbers, shapes, and names in them? That's just that couldn't be just a statistical accident. Could it be that the owners and the families that started these, at one time they were relatively small, but they all grew to giant companies? But that's, of course, a lot due to the fact that the founders and the founders' families were powerful elite families. Now, what did they have in common? Well, the symbols, the numbers, the pictures with the occult references are all symbols that indicate either a Luciferian satanic belief system or the various attributes and teachings of the Luciferian and occult and satanic belief system. In other words, why is it that there's a universal messaging in terms of symbols, logos, designs, numbers, names that point to occult religion, Luciferian religion, Satanism, witchcraft, the occult, etc.? Why is that? I thought we were a Christian nation. Okay, this is where once you grasp this as a fact and flip it, your life will be changed forever. It's because those are not, because money is power. The person that has the money has the power. The person that has the power controls the political realm and the government and business. Don't buy the baloney that you've been programmed to buy, which is, it's we the American people that decide what the government does and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's how it was originally intended to be. That's what our founding fathers wanted. That's what's written in our Constitution. But the reality that we live in now goes like that, goes like this. He who has the power, he who has the money has the power, and that's the power to control armies and politicians. So the money is the most important thing. You know who said that? Rothschild. I write all about this in my book, Conquering the Matrix and Mass Awakening. It was Rothschild who said, I don't care who's president, prime minister. I don't care, who's the president. Rothschild said, just give me the money. And with the money, I can control and put in anybody I want to be the president or the prime minister. Just give me the money, he says. Because Rothschild understood that it was all about the money. If you had the money, you had the power. And then you can control government and politics. So you want to know who really owns the government in America? It's no brainer. Who really controls everything in America? It's a no brainer. You want to know who put this president or that president in office? It's a no brainer. What you need to ask is, who has the money? And the more important question you need to ask is, who has the most money? Because he or she who has the most money has the most power, the most control, etc., etc. So you find out who the people in the world are who have the most money. And I write about this in my book, Mass Awakening, A Prophecy of the Future of America. Are you ready for the microchip? I wrote about it a lot, but I just talked to you about. And in the Babylon Code that I wrote with Troy Anderson. And here's the key. The people who own the money are the same people. No, let's put it this way. The people who own the most money globally are the same people who own the giant corporations, the giant financial institutions, the giant international banks, and the international bankers. Those are the people that own the most money. They're the same as those who own the corporations and the financial institutions and the banks. It's the same group of people. That's why they use the same logos with the occult symbols and numbers. It's the same lineage of people. It's the same group of people. That's why it was Rothschild who made that horrific statement about he who owns the money or controls the money controls everything. Rothschild is a member of one of these special families, which we call bloodline families or Illuminati elite families. They control the world. But they have a belief system. And their belief system is expressed in the symbolism, the numerology, and the messaging that's in the corporate logos and the corporate names. They're telegraphing who they are. And you see Luciferian, satanic, demonic symbolism in all these corporate logos, financial institution logos, and banking logos, etc. So once you understand that there is an invisible group that controls the world, maybe just 12 families, and they own the major financial institutions and corporations, and they own the most money, and they call the tune for the entire world, and they communicate this to one another and to the world openly with the symbols, with the numbers and the numerology and the names and everything else. That's why you see like lightning bolts in so many corporate logos, or lightning bolt type symbolism. That goes to the Lucifer, the lightning bolts. Lucifer, the lightning bolts were on the SS Nazi troops. Lightning bolts was a symbolism on their military caps and their shirts and stuff. The swastika is a symbol that comes from ancient Hinduism. Now, of course, that symbol is not allowed because it represents overt death and killing of Adolf Hitler. But there are many symbols. There's many symbols that you see every day. You see hundreds of symbols every day, and if you knew the meaning of a lot of those symbols, you'd be stunned. But you have to know what to look for. And in my books, I extensively give you. In the books, I write down the names of many of the corporations, what's in their logos. And I do chapters on explaining how to recognize occult symbolism and where occult symbolism is used in corporate logos and governmental symbols and NASA symbols and everything else. In fact, let's just take NASA and all the missions. NASA, the symbols of NASA, the symbols of the missions, the names of the rocket missions, the names of so many things within NASA is bursting, overflowing with occult symbolism, Luciferian symbolism, symbolism of occult gods and Freemasonry and Illuminati symbols. NASA is a fountainhead of it. Just think of, let's just throw one out, Apollo 13. Apollo was a Roman god that descended, when you understand the history of occult symbolism, Nimrod, who was the founder of Babylon, his wife Semiramis killed him and said that Nimrod ascended into the heavens and became Ra, the sun god. So from Nimrod to Ra, the sun god, and then to all the other occult male gods flowing out of Babylon, like Osiris, and then eventually you get a series of male names, Poseidon, and then one of the occult names is Apollo. So Apollo is clearly an occultic name. And then the choice of, quote, the unlucky number 13, like Friday the 13th, that's just the beginning of the occult symbolism embedded in the Apollo 13 mission. And 13 in occult circles is commonly known as an occultic number. It's also the number of bad luck. And Freemasons get high off numerology. So that's just one institution. We could go through all kinds of institutions. You'd be horrified if you looked at people who represent respectable institutions. If you really knew what the logos and symbolism and artwork and names meant on the the decorative stuff they wear and put on letterhead and stuff. So you see, what this is another name for what I'm talking about is what the Bible calls the world system. The world system. We live, the Bible says, in a temporary world system ruled temporarily by Lucifer until the second coming of Christ. This is the world system that is run by Lucifer. So, of course, the world system that is run by Lucifer would have an affinity for symbols and numbers that represent the worship of Lucifer. And that's how the game is played. Now, let's take it right into coronavirus time, not Miller time. I stopped drinking beer a long time ago. I used to be a big beer drinker. That was till I was about 23. But I drank enough beer from the time I was, 13 or 14 to the time I was 23. I drank enough beer in those years that more than met a quota. But the USA and the world, we're not in Miller time or game time. We're in real time. We're in coronavirus time. And we're in a crisis. And it's not a fictional crisis. It may be a hyped crisis. It may be an amped up crisis, but it's not. The crisis is real. There is a coronavirus. Now the biography of the coronavirus, and it does have a biography, by the way, is I believe they're hiding from you the biography or the origins of the coronavirus. In my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind, I talk a great deal, as I have in earlier books, about bacteriological warfare and germs and flus and viruses that are invented in laboratories. That's been going on a long time. But now we're all enforcing social distancing, which I think is a good thing, because the transmission, we all know what causes the transmission of the coronavirus, or at least we know something about it. But back to the world, this money gets funneled in terms of bailouts. It always goes to the same people. It goes to the people, really, who need it the least on a personal level. It always goes to the richest, the wealthiest, and the most powerful people in the world. Isn't it interesting that they are the ones that always get bailed out because they're too big to fail? And even when they caused the crisis. I'm not saying they caused the coronavirus, but they caused the 2008 collapse. And so the person who needs it the most, we always hear how the backbone of America is the small business owner. It's the most important thing in our economy is the small business owner. We hear it over and over again. Well, that's all propaganda lies, and you know what else? There's a word for it that I'm too polite of a Christian to just let it rip. But everything in me would love to let it all rip and to say the words. But I'm not going to. I was teetering on the edge of the yes button of temptation. Somebody must have been praying for me because I slammed on the brakes and I said, no, I'll resist the temptation to say that. Thank God for that person who prayed for me. So I talk about the need for me to that we wouldn't have a ministry without your intercessory prayers for me, my family, and this ministry. There would be no ministry. And people prayed for me. And I believe the reason I put the brakes on saying something that I was tempted to say and I didn't say is because somebody has been praying for me and the Holy Spirit reined me in. Because it wouldn't have been the end of the world if I had said that. But looking at it from non-self-centered perspective, perhaps me saying that could have caused some believer in Christ to stumble in his or her faith because they would have been bothered by those words spoken by a Christian minister. So thank God that you prayed for me. Because I'll tell you what, that was not a decision that Paul McGuire made. I mean, it was like I was trying to make the decision, but then somebody turned on the light in my soul and spirit, and it just felt the sense of, Paul, that's wrong. Just shut up. So I did. But the point I'm trying to make is that this money always seems to get funneled to the same group of the super elite, the globalist elite, the wealthiest people in the world, the 1%. And actually, all the new data says, they've been saying like 1%, because I've been writing about it in my books. For example, in the book, A Prophecy of the Future of America, which should say Volume 1, and then Volume 2 of A Prophecy of the Future of America, it says 2016, 2017. There are two books, Volume 1, Volume 2. I shouldn't have titled the second one with an ambiguous title. But I talk a great deal about the 1% in that book. And the whole thing is that 1% of the Earth's population controls all the financial assets and every resource there is. So 1% of the people of planet Earth control 99% of all the wealth, resources, and assets. And you listen to these communist revolutionaries and these airhead socialists talk. Airhead socialists, communists, Marxists. Because you have to be an airhead. Why? Because it's a universally recognized fact that 1% of the population controls all the money, wealth, resources, and assets. So if 1% basically controls everything, then how can you turn around and blame the 99% for the pollution, for the damage, the alleged damage to climate change, to all the problems and everything else? You can't. If you were thinking rationally, you wouldn't even remotely suggest that the 99% of the people on planet Earth who own basically nothing in percentage to the 1% who own 99% of all the assets, money, resources in the world. Only 1% of the population of planet Earth controls, runs, owns all the money, the banks, the assets, the corporate. Only 1%. But since I've written my book, Prophecy of the Future of America, 2016-2017, as I projected in the book, that 1% has now hitting the mark of 0.5% or 0.5%. So where we are now is we've moved from 1% controlling everything and owning everything to now it's only 0.5% or 0.05% of the world's population controlling and owning everything. In other words, the 1% have gotten richer and richer and richer. And where do you think all that money? Well, let's get down to the bottom line, because this has been like a 50-year process. How do you think it was possible? It used to be, I don't know. Let's just start. It used to be 10,000%, 100,000% of the world's population controlled all the money and resources of the earth. Before that, there was only 1,000,000% of the people controlled all the money, resource, and stuff in the world. And then in the past 50 years, it was like 100 people. I think when I was a kid, it was like 250 people controlled all the assets and money in the world. And then it was like 30 people, and then it was like this, 10 people. Now it's 1%. Or really now it's 0.5%. So where did this 0.5%, where did this minority how did this minority of people on planet Earth keep getting richer and richer and richer? Well, you would say good old-fashioned hard work if it wasn't for the fact that at the same time the 1% was getting richer and richer and richer, that the working class and the middle class were in an exact proportionate percentage relationship, getting poorer and poorer and poorer, which means that it was the money flowing out of the pockets of the working class and the middle class and the small business owner, which was going directly into the bank accounts of the 1%, making them richer and richer. And so what appears to be happening once again, despite all this rhetoric about bailing out the small business owner, which is the backbone of America, and the working class and the middle class, it seems that all those trillions of dollars are going to the very top people, that 0.5% that rules the world once again. We'll see. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. I really do. I hope I'm wrong. So the point is that on a global level, these crises are crises, but there's somebody who was always making money. Just think of two of the crises: 2008 economic collapse, and now the coronavirus. And there seems to be, at least in the first crisis we know, the people who made money on that were all the international bankers, investors, and financial institutions. Well, you say, well, they lost billions of dollars and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, they did. But how many of the guys on the top of those financial pyramid banks and financial institutions and the major corporations, how many on the very, very top positions, the 1% that rule, the 0.5% of the, how many of them? We know that there was a hit financially and a loss financially in these giant corporations and financial institutions and among their investors, etc. But at the very top of the economic period, where the guy who owns the majority of this or that stock shares and has the most money in control, remember, these men and women are diversified. How many of them lost money or increased monetary worth when everybody else was losing their shirts? And the clock is still out on what happens with the coronavirus. But the point is that you have the working class and the middle class, so the ordinary people, you have small business owners, and then you look at and where does the small business owner go to get help? During the coronavirus, where has the small business owner, the backbone of America, been told to get help during the coronavirus crisis? They're told that we have excellent SBA loans for you. No, we don't. But they don't say, well, we have SBA loans for you and some stimulus packages for you, $1,200. They don't tell you that up front. And they don't tell you that, well, we have loans for you, but if you were the head of Chase Manhattan Bank or something, we wouldn't have a loan for you. We would just give it to you. So the money isn't going to the small business owner. I mean, monies are going to the small business owner, but not anywhere near the percentage and levels of monies going to the giant corporations. Because those people who own and the families that own those giant corporations appear to belong to this incredibly powerful, wealthy, and super secret society club that is more powerful than governments and controls and runs the banks and the money of the world. And it's the club or the secret society that the 1% seems to belong to. Because they all participate in corporations with the same symbols and numerology on the logos, which are occultic and Luciferian. Am I starting to make sense? You really need to master this. I'm serious. My good friend, many of you know him, Dr. David Hawking, Hope for Today Ministries, a powerful Bible prophecy for decades, a powerful Bible teacher and radio Bible teacher, especially in Bible prophecy over decades and decades. And a man who became a personal friend of mine, and we've ministered together, and I've spoken at his conferences. And I told part of the story before. I was in the green room in television, in media, in theater, and in churches. The green room, if you have a large church and you're doing televised services and stuff, or televised meetings, you have a green room because you have usually numerous guests who are guest speakers, often the guest speakers and their wives and children, and sometimes their ministry associates. And so there has to be a room where the speakers can, and the conference organizers, like in this case it was David Hawking, can organize the event and all be in a room together, not to hide from the people, but just to get some time to chill out before their next speaking session or whatever. So it's called the green room, and there's, apples and bottles of soda or Coke or whatever, just like a hangout room to get ready for when you're going to go speak. So in the green room, David Hawking was impromptu. He picked up my book, The Day the Dollar Died, and I knew he had read it before, and he was paging through it, looking at the chapter titles and some of the contents. And what he said to me was very surprising, because David is like, David's very unique. I love him. He probably laughs when he thinks of me. But David's like, it's got to be the Bible, and I agree, or nothing else. And I agree with him. It's just that I could tell he was a little wary, not of me, of past, let's just call them conspiracy theory genre books, okay? Which is not how I define myself, but how some people would. And but he had pondered this. I could tell he had pondered this Federal Reserve printing money from nothing, the whole conspiracy behind the financial institutions. So as he's paging through my book, The Day the Dollar Died, he says, Paul, I really think you're hitting on something very important here. Now, that may be understated to you, but from David Hawking, that is a massive compliment, because he's not like, overly. He's not the type of person who overly would congratulate you. But he recognized, as a Bible scholar and a man of the Word, that what I was talking about was, especially with the elite, the power, occult networks within the elite and the monetary system. He recognized that what I was talking about was biblical, and how it all fit into Bible prophecy, because it does. It takes us right to the mark of the beast. So you have a template that's always used. It's the working formula. Sometimes it's called order out of chaos. Sometimes it's called manufacture crisis. Sometimes it's called problem, reaction, solution. All those terminologies are variations of the same occultic principle developed by the Freemasons. Order out of chaos. So the key is, you use crisis or you use chaos to create a problem, and there's always a public reaction to the problem, which is panic and fear and being scared and terrified. And that was planned also. And then you give the people the pre-planned solution to their problem, and the people will do anything. because they're so petrified, they won't think rationally, and they will do anything for peace and health or whatever. And therefore, the solution, this whole dynamic, was planned in advance. Now, I'm not making a comment regarding the coronavirus because the jury is still out. We don't have all the facts yet. So it's premature to reach a honest conclusion. But it's interesting that the people who are in the elite wealthy families that own 0.5%, the 0.5% that own the rest of the world, the secret societies they belong to, in their symbolism of the secret societies, their symbolism is very Luciferian and satanic. So let me explain what I mean. Speaking of mass deaths, wealth, and secret societies, all the German Nazi generals and Hitler himself, they were all involved in satanic and occult secret societies, such as Skull and Bones, which is a German occult secret society. The logo for the Skull and Bones secret society was the proverbial pirate skull and crossbones. That's the same thing as the Skull and Bones secret society symbol. All right? So the Nazi SS and the generals who were parts of Skull and Bones wore Skull and Bones belt buckles and insignias, etc., etc. But Skull and Bones is the symbol of death. And yet you have American presidents who proudly say they're members of Skull and Bones, like President Bush Jr. and John Kerry and others. And with Ivy League school connections, Yale has a has a Skull and Bones secret society building, etc., where weird rituals go on and stuff. So what is Skull and Bones? It's a symbol of death. It's the symbol of death on the artwork, on the symbol, on the logo of the SS. Now, what happened in Nazi Germany that comes to your mind with Skull and Bones? Okay, so Skull and Bones is on the insignias, the belt buckles, the symbols, the cards, the letterhead of all the Nazi generals, etc., who were secret society members of Skull and Bones, the secret society. Now, let your mind access all the files surrounding Nazi Germany, World War II, and the Holocaust, and you can remember the pictures of these giant pits packed with naked skeleton-like bodies of dead naked people. But the skin, sorry for being graphic, but there was such a loss of weight in their bodies that they even though they had a thin film of flesh around them, I apologize, they looked like skeletons. They looked like Skull and Bones because they were so emaciated. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? Well, you can say that came from the Nazis and what they did. Yeah, but before that, the secret societies like Skull and Bones, these people believe in satanic sacrifices and mass offerings. So before there were 7 million slaughtered, either gassed to death, shot to death, and then thrown naked to rot in these giant pits looking like skeletons. Before that happened, there were insignias everywhere where people were proudly displaying with the Skull and Bones logo and belt buckles and insignias their membership in the secret society Skull and Bones. But it's a satanic society. Skull and Bones represents death. It's a death symbol. And if you had a problem believing that because you had a thick head, then just look what happened a couple of years later in Nazi Germany. And you saw massive piles of millions of skeletal bodies lying naked in ditches. That's the fruition of the philosophy and the occult belief system. Now, this is the zinger that has to hit home. This is like where you get a chance to be the pinball wizard, and you know, you're playing incredible pinball in one of those old-fashioned pinball machines. None of this new computerized, Think of a pinball machine 30 years ago. You're playing on a pinball machine 30 years ago. One of these classic pinball machines. This is where you get a chance to just zing it and win the game and rack up the most points. Okay? And this is it. If indeed, as the Bible says is the case, that Satan or Lucifer is now the temporary god of this world, that would mean he controls the money and the power of this world, and that would mean that he controls the people who control the money and the power of this world. It's just a absolutely airtight, logical analysis of the flow of power. If Lucifer is the temporary god of this world, and what is Lucifer ultimately all about? Death. Because why did Lucifer become the temporary god of this world? Because Adam and Eve activated the law of sin and death. And so Lucifer brings death and destruction wherever he goes. And so Lucifer is now in control of this world temporarily. But he has an organization, an organizational flowchart in the form of a pyramid. And at the very top of his organizational flowchart are the fallen angels and the human beings that he rewards the most, but he requires the most from them. In other words, they have to obey his orders. And so if you don't think this happens, then you don't read your Bible very long. We know that Lucifer, one of his primary mandates is to deceive the world and have himself be worshipped as God or Jesus Christ. We know that Lucifer wants to kill off everybody who believes in Jesus Christ or God. We know that Lucifer wants to prevent, in any way he can, men and women from having babies or aborting babies, because he knows God is love and God wants billions of people to live with him comfortably in heaven for all eternity. And Lucifer wants to prevent that. So Lucifer is behind death, destruction. And so who does he have to get? Remember, it's a hierarchical system. It's an organizational flowchart. The people at the top have the most power. They're the super elite, the globalist elite. So they have to, like the Nazi generals, they have to carry out Hitler or Satan's orders without question. So when you're dealing at the level of power that these people operate at, they're looking down on us, okay? And you don't think that they have discussions that we need to reduce the Earth's population from 7 billion to just 500 million in less than 10 years? Of course they have that discussion. We know they have the discussion because that discussion has been publicized in mainstream periodicals. The people that are promoters of euthanasia. What is euthanasia? It's the killing off as many people you can because you believe that overpopulation is the biggest threat to mankind. So you use any method you can to reduce the Earth's population. And the most radical of these elite people, like Bertrand Russell, the English New World Order planner, philosopher, intellectual, he literally said in his own writing, I have it quoted in my book, Mass Awakening, he said in his own words over and over again, how we need to create biological warfare, pandemics and epidemics and disease outbreaks on a regular basis that will kill off hundreds of millions of people on planet Earth. And we need to do it continually. We need to have a new form of the Black Plague, every 5 years or something. So these guys are openly advocating the creating of biological warfare disease as the mechanism necessary to reduce the Earth's population from 7 billion down to 500 million. They put it on the Georgia Guidestones in writing on that tablet. Goal for planet Earth: reduce the Earth's population from its current level of 7 billion down to 500 million. And it didn't say in a short period of time, but there was a date that was represented the fact that they wanted to do this quickly. These are the same people who have their loyalty, their blood oaths, that belong to these Luciferian secret societies. See how the puzzle pieces should be fitting together? Now, you fly into Denver International Airport in Colorado. When you fly in and you taxi or you drive in, when I say taxi, I mean the jet taxiing, you'll see this modern gigantic sculpture just outside of the airport, this giant blue metallic sculpture of like a stallion horse kicking its legs high into the air, and its eyes like a laser beam intense red. So it looks very demonic. It's an ominous, demonic looking, it's not a friendly, comforting, warm statue of a horse. It's a demonic statue of a horse. Okay? And then you have all these rumors of a massive, massive underground base city that's supposed to goes down who knows how many stories and stretches out for who knows how many miles. And as the rumor or legend goes, there's a super underground bunkered city under the Denver airport. Okay, that's neither here nor there because I can't comment on what I don't know for a fact, yes or no. But I do know this: when you walk around the airport and look at this artwork, these paintings that somebody painted, they're the weirdest paintings in the world. Nobody in their right mind paints paintings like this to adorn the walls of one of the world's most prestigious airports. These are demonic paintings. You need to look at them. Pictures of swords and pictures of like World War III and pictures of a plague causing deaths and pictures of mass extinction and mass carnage and devastation and pictures of World War III and pictures of global conflict. They're scary, evil pictures. Why would somebody... Oh, and they're all pictures of death and destruction. So it's a demonic theme and a demonic... Why? Same demonic theme as the other stuff I was talking about. Why? Then you think that that there are some secret societies and groups that are Luciferian in nature, the highest level of our society. And while Christians have been sleeping and not reading the Word of God and not attending Bible preaching churches and not been gathering to churches that preach the truth, while Christians have been socially distancing themselves from God long before the term social distance became even a phrase, these powerful occult groups have been more bold and more showy of their power and influence on our society. I'll give you another case in point. I can give you 100 right off the top of my head. I list them in my book, The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. I'll give you another one. And when I was in Manhattan recently, I spent time researching this. somebody with a lot of money brought in from the Middle East the actual archaeological remains of the Temple of Baal, and had it set up in the park surrounding the governor's mansion or the mayor's mansion in New York. Now, why would some elite group bring in? Did I say replica? No, it wasn't an archaeological replica. It was the actual it was the actual part of the Temple of Baal. It was an archway and a corridor from the Temple of Baal. It was part of the Temple of Baal, brought in from the Middle East. And they set it up to be in Manhattan, on the grounds of the mansion of the mayor of New York. Now, ask yourself what Baal is the false god in the Old Testament. Baal is continually referred to. I explain the Baal worship, its origins, its spread in my book, Conquering the Matrix. This is Baal worship in an essence. You burn your child alive on the altars of Baal. This is done by Baal is built as a metallic idol statue, and then Baal has like open hands, and you place your live baby boy or girl into the hands of the altar of Baal. But because Baal's a metallic statue, it's superheated up with fires inside, coals. So the hands of the Baal statue are metal, but they're burning with like a white flame heat because it's so hot. So when you put sorry for saying this, but this is true. When you put your live baby, it burns to death in an agonizing death. And what you're doing is you're sacrificing on purpose your son or daughter, burning them alive on the statue of Baal as an act of worship to Baal. And you're expecting, because you're sacrificing your own baby daughter or son to Baal, you're then expecting that Baal will bless you, provide for you, make you rich, do something very powerful for you. It's an exchange. The Baal worship is spread all around the world. So that's what happens at a temple of Baal. It's a satanic altar where you sacrifice in an occult ceremony. You allow your son or daughter to be burned to death while alive. It's a human sacrifice altar. Now, use your sane mind and rational mind. Why on earth would anybody, no matter how wealthy or powerful, want to import into the United States of America a massive segment of the Temple of Baal? And the whole purpose of the Temple of Baal was to worship Baal, a false god, and sacrifice your son or daughter, have them burnt alive to secure supernatural blessings from the false god Baal. That is not amusing. That is not artistic. Let me give you the moral equivalent and shock value that should be the reaction. That would be the exact same equivalent of going to Nazi Germany and some elite group purchasing one of the gas chambers where they burnt the Jews and others alive. Okay? Or one of the other places where they put to death the Jews and others alive in Nazi Germany. That would be like spending endless millions of dollars to bring a huge part of that gas chamber and that part of the concentration camp that killed Jews and others back into the United States and setting it up as some kind of commemorative thing. Now, I'm not saying it for the purpose of a commemoration of like remembering in sorrow, or to be reminded of the danger that this can happen to any nation. I'm saying that the motive in the hearts of the people doing it was to celebrate what happened. Do you know what would happen if anybody did that? The Jews in America would rise up, and that group and the importing of part of a concentration camp where they killed the Jews, etc., would create such a firestorm of righteous anger among the Jews. It would be a blasphemy beyond blasphemies. I guarantee you, growing up in an all-Jewish neighborhood in Jackson Heights, Queens, that would probably be torn down before construction even began. And if they even laid a brick in place, that would be it. Jews wouldn't put up with it. Christians, on the other hand, can act all lovey and dovey and are perfectly fine with an altar of Baal, which represents worship to Satan and human sacrifice. Christians, who are all lovey and dovey, well, you know what happened. They didn't protest diddly squat. I did. Others did. Most Christians. The Christians in New York, most of them said nothing. That's the problem. There's this quote, "The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing." The coronavirus is a challenge, and we will make it through this. And when I say that, this is not like rah-rah talk, pep talk after a losing football game. I'm saying that because I believe in God and God answers prayer. I don't believe it's over for the United States, at least not now. But I think that the way Christians specifically handle this and react to it, and whether they pray or don't pray, and many other things, and most of all that they conduct themselves with wisdom, and most of all that they conduct themselves by saying, before I say this, before I embark on this action or whatever, for crying out loud, think through the consequences, good and bad, of any potential decision you make. Just like you were a military general. One of my favorite verses in the Bible is that the general counts the cost before he goes to war. Man, I would like to literally, don't be offended, I wouldn't be in the room, so there would be no hint of immorality, but no, I'm not going to say this. Again, I'll resist it. I would totally resist this, or I'll get myself in trouble. That verse, let me just put it this way. That verse that the wise general counts the cost before he goes to war, should be memorized by every Christian. Because it is simply a proverb which reminds us that before we make any decision, before we embark on any plan of action, we need to think about everything that could go right and everything that could go wrong. And then do some kind of analysis where we determine whether or not we have the resources. Is this the right time? Do we have the right plan of action? I mean, you really think it through. Guys who are military generals that win wars, not lose wars, think things through. They have contingency plans. They just don't, go off half-baked. Because people who go off half-baked never bothered to think about the obvious blowback of their wrong actions. And good intentions is not enough. So they got good intentions, but they did not do what Proverbs tells us to do, which is to function like the wise general who, before he runs off into battle or runs off starting a war, the wise general considers the cost. In other words, there is going to be a cost to your actions and decisions. Have you thought them through properly? Because if you haven't, you're going to lose your war. And God has placed you and I in a spiritual war, in the greatest spiritual war in the history of the world. So every one of us has a role to play. I have a role to play as the host of this program and of Paul McGuire Ministries in Paradise Mountain Church. I have a role to play. And I can only fulfill that role by my personal willingness to count the cost, but also by having intercessory prayer warriors and people praying for us, people who will send our links far and wide, people who will obey the Lord when the Lord speaks to them, and will give financially whatever the Lord tells them to give in whatever season. Because your ultimate source is God. If you're looking to man, if all your hope is in man, you're going to be bitterly disappointed. God can use man, but your hope ultimately is in God. Ultimately, God is your source. You can never be victorious until you learn that lesson. God is your source. And once you realize God is your source, you should have no fear of the coronavirus. That doesn't mean you walk around like a blank head with nothing in it. You use wisdom. You abide by godly counsel. But when you have the wisdom of God, there's no reason to fear the coronavirus or anything either. And let me add to that, for those of you in whatever age group you're in, young, teenagers, older, may I say this to you as your friend, Paul McGuire? Please, do, and write it down if it helps. Put it on the refrigerator. Do not fear the future. Don't fear the future. You are going to have a future. Yeah, you're going to have a future, and it's not going to be a nightmare future. Well, let's just say it. You're going to have a future. There will be a world worth living in. Will it be a fallen world? Yes. Will it be a world with Bible prophecy being fulfilled? Yes. But let's remember these words that Jesus Christ spoke and apply them to today. When Jesus Christ was talking about the general societal conditions of what the world would be like shortly before his second coming, Jesus Christ told his disciples that people would be marrying and giving in marriage right up until the time of the second coming. What does that mean? What do those exact words mean? Those exact words tell us that there has to be a removal and practically non-existence of social distancing. Did you hear that? Because you can't be having a wedding and wedding parties and marriages that are normal with social distancing at the same time. So Jesus tells us that right before his second coming, people are going to be getting married and giving in marriage. And he wasn't implying by telephone or Skype. He was saying like regular marriage ceremonies, which involve wedding parties. These are social gatherings in most cultures where lots of people cram together, eat food, and celebrate the wedding. And that is going to be the ceremony of marriage and marriages is not going to stop right up into the second coming. So anybody with any ability to analyze the Bible would recognize that social distancing as a new norm, despite what Dr. Gucci's Gucci's the fashion designer. Excuse me. Dr. Fauci or whatever his name is. You know what? When he comes on, I don't really pay attention a whole lot. Because you know why? This is me. I have a credibility problem with him. Well, I'm telling you, okay, that's a fault. You're saying, what's the rational basis for that? my gut. That's my rational basis for it. My gut and my brain. Because I don't think he shoots straight. Well, part of his job is not to shoot straight. Part of his job is not to panic the American people. But having said that, whenever he comes on, I daydream because I don't buy him as having integrity. I could be totally wrong, but my brain goes on autopilot when he comes on television. So the point is that since Jesus said there's going to be marrying and giving in marriage right before the second coming, that means obviously that social distancing will not be enforced very long. Because if it was of a significant length, Jesus would have done a little add-on to that statement. In fact, Jesus would have said, if social distancing was going to be militantly enforced right before the second coming, then Jesus would have to have said, and there will be no marrying or giving in marriage in those days because of the plague which is to come or something. That's what he would have had to say. But notice he didn't say that. He said, right up until the second coming, there's going to be marriage and giving in marriage. Wedding parties, wedding celebrations, marriage ceremonies. That's all people cloistered together. Notice that there's no reference to that by Jesus. You know why? Because however long this social distancing thing lasts, and by the way, I am an advocate and believe in enforcing social distancing, at least for the time being, because that seems to be the primary method of transmission. So I'm certainly not against it. But what I'm saying from a larger perspective, according to Jesus, social distancing is not some new norm. In other words, the world's customs and ceremonies and society is not going to fall apart. So, because God's in control. And it also implies that there's going to be a relative stability and relative prosperity to the economy. So you shouldn't fear economic collapse and the end of everything economically. You say, well, how can you say that? You know why I can say that? Take a deep breath. Not because I take deep breaths. That's not how come I can say it, because I don't practice yoga. I'm not using an oxygen tank because, no, I'm not going to say that. God, that would be misinterpreted. But look, I'm saying that because it's common sense. If there's going to be marrying and giving in marriage, there's going to be wedding parties. There's going to be engagement rings and wedding rings and social gatherings and restaurants and food and banquets. So if the economy was shot to pieces right before the second coming, nobody could afford to get married or give in marriage because that implies, for most people, a significant financial investment. So the economy has to be doing halfway decently before the second coming. And the economy actually has to be doing better than halfway decent. It has to be doing well. You know why? Just talk to women and men. When things get bad, what you hear women say and men say is, we don't want to have kids. We don't want to bring them into this world. We're not going to get married because we don't want to have kids. We don't want to bring them to this world. People say that all the time. I understand why they say that. But so that tells us that if people were all freaked out because of an economic collapse and a pandemic or whatever, either or both, then they wouldn't be getting married and giving in marriage. So it implies that there's a somewhat healthy economy, that there is a level of prosperity before the second coming. It's right in the verse, man, if you just open your eyes. Dave Hunt was the one who showed this to me. And then I have these people who are Dave Hunt fans who attack me And Dave Hunt was a friend of mine, and Dave Hunt liked me, and Dave Hunt endorsed my ministry. He was on my radio program all the time. I can invite anybody who I want to invite. I'd put Dave Hunt 2 hours at a time. You think Dave Hunt didn't like me and didn't endorse me? Of course he did. But I have some of his mentally unhinged disciples attacking me. But I can't call Dave back from heaven to defend me. But that's what happens when you're a leader and on the front line. It just goes with the territory. So what do we learn? A time of prosperity before the second coming, and there will be no enforcement of social distancing rules. Okay? People are going to get married and given marriage. So, you need to get over some of your fear, a lot of your fear. In fact, most of your fear. In fact, all of your fear is you spend most of the time watching TV and not reading the Bible. I mean, if you were listening to the Paul McGuire Report or watching the Paul McGuire prophetic emergency alerts, for the same amount of hours you watch mainstream media, TV, and whatever, I guarantee you one thing: you wouldn't be walking around in a state of depression. Why? It's not. I deal with reality, but I give answers. They have no answers to give. I watched the Pope today. The girl was in tears over what the Pope said. The Pope didn't say anything. He said the most mediocre, timid, tepid, pathetically weak words of encouragement. I guess if you're starving for water in the middle of a blazing desert of mainstream media, mere moisture on the back of a leaf would be satisfactory to you. Me, I would prefer a tall glass of water. Anyway, we're out of time. God bless you. This is Paul McGuire. Spread the word far and wide. Visit paulmcguire.us.